Chapter 1. The Crimson Dust of Ashworth. The rain in the Valley of Ashes wasn't water. It was a fine, rust-colored dust, the legacy of centuries of bloodshed. It clung to everything: the shattered stone of the ruined watchtowers, the bleached bones of countless soldiers, and the worn leather of Captain Kaelin's armor. It tasted of iron and regret. Had been wading through it for the better part of a day, the stench a constant, nauseating reminder of the war that had choked the land for a decade, the war of the shattered sky. Kaelin, Inquisitor of Arathor, was a man sculpted by grief and duty. At 38, his face was etched with the harsh lines of relentless investigation, his gray eyes holding the perpetual weariness of a soul burdened by witnessing humanity's darkest impulses. He wasn't a warrior by birth. Had been a scholar, a compiler of ancient texts, until the whispers of treachery, of poisoned peace talks, and of generals promising eternal life in exchange for annihilation had led him to this desolate valley. He wasn't alone. Beside him, his scout Vorlag shifted nervously, the scarred Orcish Exile pulling his thick woolen cloak tighter against the persistent chill. Vorlag, once a chieftain's most trusted warrior, had been branded a traitor for refusing to participate in the massacre of a human village, a massacre he insisted was orchestrated. His exile, a consequence of his righteous defiance, had led him to the uneasy alliance of Arathor, a path forged in suspicion and mutual desperation. "The reports are consistent," Kaelin said, his voice grim as he adjusted the grip on his holy fire, a flickering beacon of solidified faith. "Every intercepted message, every recovered document, points to the same conclusion. The Veiled Hand has manipulated every facet of this conflict." Vorlag grunted, his massive frame radiating a simmering tension. "Manipulated? Or commanded? The humans are driven by fervor, the elves by tradition. The orcs simply crave blood. It is easy to twist a hungry heart." Suddenly, a sharp crackle sliced through the air, followed by the frantic voice of Lyra, the Elven Ranger, over the wrist-mounted Vox crystal. "Captain Kaelin!" We've observed a significant movement. 3,000 men, likely from the Moon-Glow Guard, approaching from the eastern ridge. And something's changed. The air feels colder. Lyra, a study in quiet elegance and deadly precision, was a paradox, a daughter of a revered elven lineage, yet driven by a solitary purpose, seeking to understand the roots of the escalating conflict. Her approach was methodical, her knowledge of arcane energies and battlefield tactics unmatched. She was, Kaelin grudgingly admitted, a vital component of this improbable trio. As they crested a rise, the sight confirmed Lyra's report. The Moon-Glow Guard, clad in shimmering silver armor, marched with a chilling uniformity, their movements betraying no fear, only an unnerving, almost ecstatic, devotion. Leading them was Lord Arion, a veteran commander known for his unwavering loyalty, or so it seemed. "He's a fool," Vorlag growled, hefting his axe. "A pretty fool with a fancy sword, but a fool nonetheless. He believes in the promises whispered in his ear." Just then, a horn blared from the Arathor vanguard, a deep, resonant call signaling the arrival of General Theron, the man tasked with leading Arathor's forces. Kaelin immediately recognized the familiar arrogance in Theron's posture, the unsettling gleam in his eyes. Theron was a man of immense power, revered for his strategic brilliance, and the very embodiment of the corrupt leadership Kaelin had been investigating. "Theron!" Kaelin shouted, raising his holy fire. "Hold! I order you to cease!" Theron paused, a mocking smile playing on his lips. "Inquisitor. Tal, Inquisitor. Still clinging to your relics? Such quaint piety. We are merely fulfilling our duty. The Veiled Hand has guided our blades, and the reward awaits us." He gestured with his hand, and the Arathor ranks surged forward, their battle cries echoing across the desolate valley. As the initial clash erupted, a chaotic tangle of steel, magic, and desperate screams, a chilling realization dawned on Kalen. The fight wasn't driven by hatred, by the ingrained prejudices that fueled the war. It was driven by order. The Arathor, the Orcs, and even the Moon-Glow Elves were systematically eliminating each other, carefully orchestrated deaths, a gruesome, meticulously planned dance of annihilation. Lyra's voice crackled in his ear again, urgent and strained. "Captain, I'm detecting a surge of energy. Powerful, chaotic. It's originating from the center of the valley. Something is being prepared." And then, Kalen saw it. In the heart of the Valley of Ashes, bathed in an unnatural swirling darkness, the Arathor, the Moon-Glow, and the Orcs, all three armies, meticulously positioned, were facing a vast circular stone platform. Upon it, hundreds of bodies, soldiers from each race, lay arranged in a horrifying tableau. It was the beginning of the mass sacrifice. Chapter 2. The Crimson Bloom. The air in the Valley of Ashes tasted of iron and regret. The rain, a perpetual drizzle of ash gray, clung to the slick stone of the sacrificial platform, reflecting the unnatural glow emanating from its center. The initial chaos of the battle had subsided, replaced by a grim, almost reverent silence, broken only by the sickening crunch of falling bodies, and the chanting of voices, a dissonant chorus of prayers and incantation. Kalen, his face grimy with soot, and stained with the blood of a fallen Arathor captain, moved with a grim determination, pushing through the ranks of his own men. The holy fire, once a beacon of righteous fervor, now burned with a subdued intensity, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe with a malevolent energy. Beside him, Lyra, the Elven Ranger, was a whirlwind of motion, her silver bow whispering with deadly accuracy, cutting down corrupted Moon-Glow mages who attempted to intervene. Their movements were unnervingly coordinated, not with the frenetic desperation of combatants, but with the precision of a perfectly executed ritual. "It's obscene," muttered Barak Stonehand, a veteran Orcish warrior who had seen more battles than most men would live a lifetime, his massive axe dripping crimson. "They are feeding the darkness. It's a wound upon the world itself." Barak, brought into Kalen's investigation by a cryptic message from the exiled Orcish chieftain, Gruk, was a key element in the unlikely alliance. Gruk, stripped of his command due to suspicions of harboring sympathies for the Human Inquisitors, had provided them with critical intel, the whispers of the Veiled Hand, the details of the escalating sacrifices. "Silence, Barak!" Kalen commanded, his voice hardened by the sheer horror of the scene. "Observe. Why? This is not a random act of barbarity. This is a meticulously crafted weapon, designed to achieve a specific end." Suddenly, a wave of intense heat washed over them, accompanied by a guttural shriek. A group of elite Moon-Glow warriors, clad in shimmering obsidian armor, had attempted to disrupt the ritual, firing bolts of concentrated light. But the Arathor's battle mages, empowered by the newly purified holy fire, were able to deflect the blasts, weaving intricate shields of pure energy. As the last of the Moon-Glow fell, a voice, smooth and unsettlingly calm, resonated across the valley. "Such predictable resistance. The Veiled Hand anticipates every contingency. It belonged to Lord Valerius, the Arathor's grand strategist, and a man Kalen had once considered a trusted advisor. Now, the Inquisitor recognized him as a perfectly sculpted embodiment of the betrayal. Valerius, Kalen's voice, was tight with controlled fury. "You have sworn an oath to protect Arathor. What oath did you swear to this abomination?" Valerius merely smiled, a slow, chilling expression. "The oath of immortality, Inquisitor. A reward offered by the Deceiver himself. A fitting price for the eradication of your people." As he spoke, The swirling darkness above the sacrificial platform intensified, coalescing into a vortex of shadow. Figures began to emerge from the gloom soldiers, clad in the uniforms of all three races, their faces devoid of emotion, their eyes glazed over with an unnatural light. They moved with unsettling precision, flanking the remaining resistance, systematically eliminating any who dared to oppose the ritual. "The truth sight!" Lyra hissed into Kaelin's ear. In detecting a significant magical signature emanating from the mages assisting Valerius thought. "They're not merely conduits, they're actively amplifying the energy of the sacrifice." Just then, a tremor shook the ground, throwing Kaelin off balance. From the rear of the platform, a figure emerged, Master Theron, the High Bishop of the Sunken Temple, the man Kaelin had been investigating. He carried a staff topped with a pulsating obsidian orb, radiating a sickly green light. "Inquisitor Kaelin," Theron's voice dripped with false piety, "you've stumbled upon a sacred truth. The war of the shattered sky is not a conflict, it is a cleansing. A necessary purging to restore balance to the world." Theron raised his staff, and a beam of emerald energy shot out, striking Kaelin squarely in the chest. The holy fire flared, briefly pushing back the darkness, but the Inquisitor staggered, clutching at the wound. "You fight a losing battle, Inquisitor," Theron continued, his voice a venomous whisper. "The veiled hand has woven its influence into the very fabric of our kingdoms. Your efforts are futile. Join us. Embrace the promise of eternity." As Kaelin struggled to maintain his footing, Lyra unleashed a volley of silver arrows, forcing Theron to raise his staff defensively. But it was Baruch who acted decisively. With a roar he charged, his massive axe meeting Theron's staff in a shower of sparks and shattered obsidian. "Honor demands it," burrowed, cleaving the staff in two. Theron, momentarily stunned, collapsed to the ground. "Secure him!" Kaelin shouted, regaining his balance and unleashing a torrent of holy fire. As the last of the corrupted mages were subdued, a chilling realization settled upon Kaelin. It wasn't just about eliminating the traitorous leaders. It was about destroying the foundations upon which their deception was built, the very belief in the war. The mass sacrifice wasn't just a ritual, it was a carefully orchestrated performance, designed to prove that their sides were already winning, to deepen the delusion and ensure the continuation of the orchestrated annihilation. Chapter 3. The Echo of Betrayal. The air in the ruined keep of Viridian, once a beacon of elven scholarship, now reeked of burnt incense and the metallic tang of death. Kaelin, his chest still throbbing with the lingering pain of Theron's attack, knelt beside the fallen Inquisitor, examining the scorched remains of his crimson robe. Kaelin, despite the debilitating wound, felt a grim satisfaction. Theron, the zealous harbinger of the shattered sky rhetoric, was silenced. But the victory felt hollow, tainted with the unsettling knowledge that their actions, however righteous, were part of a meticulously crafted illusion. "It's not just a simple conspiracy, is it?" Lyra said, her voice tight with suppressed frustration as she meticulously cleaned her silver arrows. The veiled hand wasn't merely manipulating kings, they were creating the conflict. "Baruch, ever pragmatic," grunted, sharpening his axe with a practiced hand. "The veiled hand thrives on chaos." They fostered the distrust, stoked the flames of hatred. They were the architects of this nightmare. He gestured around the ravaged chamber, littered with the shattered remnants of magical artifacts and the skeletal remains of elven guards. Their goal wasn't just to win a war, it was to break us. Kaelin nodded, his gaze fixed on the intricate carvings adorning the walls, depictions of ancient elven rituals, now marred by the crude markings of the cult. They used the war of the shattered sky as a catalyst, a justification. By convincing each side they were being robbed of their power, they sowed the seeds of self-destruction. The mass sacrifice, it wasn't about summoning Ixion, not entirely. It was about feeding him. He rose to his feet, his face grim. The corrupted bishops, the blood-crazed chieftains, the infiltrated mages they weren't simply offering themselves. They were offering belief, a steady stream of death to nourish Ixion's influence, to solidify the narrative of stolen power and justify the escalating violence. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the keep. The remaining elven mages, recovered from their initial shock, began chanting, weaving a protective barrier of shimmering emerald light. The air thrummed with arcane energy, a desperate attempt to contain the damage and prevent further incursions from the lingering darkness. "We've managed to stabilize the dimensional rift," Alara, the senior elven mage, reported, her voice strained. "But the damage done to Viridian's protective wards is extensive. We can only hold it for a short time." Kalen turned to Lyra and Baruch. "We need to understand the scale of this deception. How many more within our own ranks have been compromised? The Veiled Hand isn't just a small cult, it's a network, a pervasive shadow reaching into the very heart of our societies." Baruch spat on the ground. "Then we cut it out, starting with the source." He surveyed the ruined courtyard below, where a contingent of human soldiers, clad in scarred bronze armor, were already engaged in a fierce skirmish with a group of Orcish warriors, a brutal, unplanned encounter born from the paranoia and mutual suspicion amplified by the Veiled Hand. "The final stage of their plan is about to unfold," Kalen said, his voice heavy with dread. "The Valley of Ashes, the designated battlefield for the mass sacrifice. We believe they intend to draw the entire force of Arathor, the Iron-Horde, and the Moon-Glow Elves into a carefully orchestrated slaughter, a final act of catharsis for Ixion." He turned back to Alara. "Can you reinforce the wards? Can you detect any residual magical signatures from the Veiled Hand? We need to know what they're planning, where they're drawing their power from." Alara shook her head, her face etched with worry. "The wards are weakening, and the interference is complex. There's a layering of magic, masking the true source. It's as if they've built a fortress around their influence, shielding it from our detection. But I can trace a pattern, a convergence of power originating from the ancient burial grounds of the first kings, deep within the Shadowfell." A cold dread washed over Kalen. The first kings, the legendary founders of Arathor, the primal Orcish clans, and the ancient elven civilization, were said to have possessed unimaginable power, a connection to the very fabric of existence. If the Veiled Hand were drawing power from their tombs, their ambition was terrifying. "We need to move quickly," Kalen declared, his voice regaining its resolute edge. "We've dealt with the immediate threat within Viridian, but the true battle is about to begin. We march to the Valley of Ashes, not to engage in a final bloody confrontation, but to disrupt the ritual, to dismantle the illusion before it consumes us all. And this time," he added, drawing his holy fire, "we're not just fighting a war, we're fighting for the very soul of our kingdom." Chapter 4. The Echoes of Kings. The rain in the Valley of Ashes wasn't the gentle weeping rain of the Silverwood. This was a viscous gray deluge, laced with a metallic tang that clung to the back of your throat. It mirrored the atmosphere, thick with the stench of blood, fear, and the unsettling hum of corrupted magic. Kalen, Alara, and Gromak, the exiled Orcish Exile, moved with a grim efficiency, their small band a ragged counterpoint to the vast armies massing on either side of the scarred valley floor. The initial scouting reports had been terrifying. The Veiled Hand's preparations weren't just logistical, they were imbued with a palpable malice. Runes carved into the very bedrock pulsed with a sickly green light, and the skeletal remains of fallen soldiers from all three nations were arranged in geometrically unsettling patterns, seemingly feeding the rising power. "The scale of this surpasses anything I've witnessed," Gromak rumbled, his scarred face a mask of grim determination as he adjusted the grip on his warhammer, Skullsplitter. "They're not just building a stage for slaughter, they're building a temple to oblivion." Alara, meticulously tracing the disrupted wards with a crystal prism, spoke in a hushed tone. The ley lines are severed, twisted. They've deliberately fractured the natural currents of magic, creating pockets of raw, unstable energy. It's like trying to navigate a storm with a broken compass. And the residual signatures, they're shifting, adapting. The veiled hand isn't simply controlling the ritual, they're learning from our attempts to stop them. Kalen, channeling his holy fire, moved with a focused intensity. The flames, normally a beacon of hope and righteous fury, now burned with an almost desperate quality, pushing back against the encroaching shadows. He consulted the worn pages of the Chronicles of Arathor, a fragmented record detailing the ancient kingdoms. "The first kings," he murmured, tracing a finger over a faded illustration of a regal bearded figure wielding a radiant scepter. "Their power was bound to the land, to the very essence of creation. To tap into it, to corrupt it, is a blasphemy of unimaginable proportions." As if on cue, the vanguard of the human and Orcish armies began to move, a tide of steel and muscle converging on the central platform erected by the veiled hand. The human king, Theron, a man of unwavering conviction and brutal efficiency, stood atop the platform, his crimson banner emblazoned with the symbol of the phoenix, a stark reminder of their nation's history of rebirth, a stark contrast to the grim tableau unfolding below. Beside him stood General Marius, a grizzled veteran with a face etched with decades of war, his hand resting on the hilt of his ancestral blade, Stormbringer. The Orcish advance was even more chaotic, a torrent of primal rage unleashed by Gromik's rallying cry. The Iron-Horde, under the command of the notoriously brutal chieftain Vorlag, surged forward, a wave of obsidian and fury, their battle cries echoing across the valley, a discordant symphony of war. Vorlag, despite his traditionally savage nature, had displayed a chillingly calculated restraint, letting the humans and elves take the initial brunt of the assault. Suddenly, a wave of disorientation washed over Kalen. The air thickened, the rain intensified, and a chorus of whispers, cold and insidious, filled his mind. It was a deliberate assault, a mental trap laid by the veiled hand. He recognized the signature immediately, the subtle manipulation of shadows, the insidious warping of perception. "They're attempting to sow discord," he shouted, deflecting the mental assault with a focused burst of holy fire. "Don't let them see your fear, your doubts. Fight with your conviction." Just as the initial chaos of the battle began to escalate, a whirlwind of clashing steel, exploding magic, and guttural screams, Ilara alerted them with a frantic cry. "The convergence! It's reaching critical mass! The energy from the burial grounds, it's overloading the wards." Across the valley, a monstrous silhouette began to coalesce within the swirling shadows. It wasn't a physical being, not entirely. It was a shifting, amorphous form, radiating an aura of immense corrupting power. Ixion, the Deceiver of Worlds, was taking shape. Theron, recognizing the imminent threat, bellowed orders, "Break their lines! Focus your fire on the core." The human army unleashed a devastating barrage of holy fire and steel, but the effect was minimal. Ixion wasn't vulnerable to physical attack. He was a wound in reality itself. Gromik, realizing the futility of direct confrontation, charged towards the central platform, skull splitter roaring, aiming to smash the runes that were fueling the ritual. But before he could reach them, figures emerged from the shadows, high mages of the veiled hand, their faces obscured by intricate masks, wielding staffs crackling with dark energy. A duel erupted, a savage dance of destruction and desperation. Kalen knew that brute force wouldn't prevail. He looked at Ilara, a silent plea in his eyes. The truth sight. "Now!" Ilara, channeling her innate magical abilities, raised her prism, directing its light at the shadowy mages. The prism pulsed with a brilliant white light, and as it passed over the mages, Their forms solidified, revealing not simply human faces, but masks of grotesque glee and unsettling serenity. They weren't just traitors, they were puppets, vessels for Ixion's influence, their minds completely consumed by the Deceiver's desire. As the final, corrupted mage fell, a single chilling laugh echoed across the Valley of Ashes, a sound that chilled Kaelin to the bone, a sound that confirmed the terrible truth. The war wasn't about power. It was about a deliberate, horrifying sacrifice. Chapter 5. The Bitter Harvest. The silence following the mages' demise was heavier than the storm clouds gathering over the Valley of Ash. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the lingering echoes of Ixion's amusement, a sound that burrowed deep into the marrow of everyone present. The sight of the mages' true forms, distorted reflections of ambition and madness, had broken the last vestiges of denial. Gromak, still panting from the brutal duel, lowered Skull Splitter, the massive warhammer feeling suddenly heavy in his hands. "They weren't fighting for us," he rumbled, his voice stripped of its usual guttural fury, replaced by a grim acknowledgement. "They were instruments." Across the scarred battlefield, King Theron of Arathor, a man forged in the fires of righteous anger, felt the same cold certainty settle over him. Had believed in the purity of his faith, the unwavering loyalty of his inquisitors. Now, the stench of betrayal and something far older, far darker hung in the air. He barked an order, his voice regaining its authoritative edge. "Secure the platform. Every mage, every priest is a threat. Execute them with ruthless efficiency." But the directive was met with a surprising resistance. Among the ranks of the Arathor's elite, the Inquisitors, led by the sharp-eyed Master Silas, were hesitating. Silas, a man renowned for his unflinching dedication to exposing heresy, was staring at the wreckage of the ritual platform, a flicker of horrified understanding in his eye. "The runes, they weren't simply channeling Ixion's power," he stated, his voice low and measured. "They were feeding him. Our faith, our bloodshed, was being used to bring him into this world." The realization spread through the Arathor ranks like wildfire. The War of the Shattered Sky wasn't a desperate struggle for resources. It was a meticulously crafted feast for a malevolent god. Meanwhile, the Orcish Horde, under the brutal command of Chieftain Vorlag, were already enacting their part of the coup of the just. The ritual combat had been swift, savage, and utterly decisive. Vorlag, fueled by ancestral rage and the raw power of the Horde, had systematically eliminated the high-ranking war chiefs who had blindly pushed for the conflict. With each felled chieftain, a renewed sense of honor surged through the warriors. The brutal exchange of blows hadn't just ended lives, it had reclaimed the Horde's core values: strength, loyalty, and a fierce devotion to the true path. "The blood cries for vengeance!" Vorlag roared, drawing his obsidian axe, Stonebreaker, a weapon said to be forged in the heart of a dying star. "Let the corrupted be purged." However, Elara's contribution to the unfolding drama remained the most unsettling. The Truth Sight, after its initial terrifying revelation, was slowly revealing something far more profound. As they scanned the surrounding battlefield, Kaelin and Elara discovered that the corruption wasn't merely confined to the High Mages. General Marius, the veteran commander of the Elven contingent, was radiating a faint, sickly green aura. His eyes, once sharp and perceptive, now held a vacant, unsettling calm. "Marius is influenced," Elara whispered, her voice strained with disbelief. "His unknowingly bolstering Ixion's presence." Kaelin exchanged a grim look with Elara. They knew they couldn't simply dispatch Marius. The revelation was too sensitive, too dangerous. It threatened to shatter the fragile alliance they were forging. Instead, they moved to isolate him, drawing him away from the main conflict, intending to find a way to sever the corrupting influence. As they approached Marius, he stopped, turning to them with a strangely serene smile. "You seek to understand, young Rangers?" he asked, his voice unnaturally smooth. You seek to control the chaos. Ixion offers a different path of perfect order. Suddenly, a wave of nausea washed over Kalen. He gripped his head, his vision blurring. He understood Marius wasn't simply influenced, he was actively resisting. Just then, a contingent of Arathor soldiers, led by Master Silas, arrived, surrounding Marius with a disciplined cordon. "The traitor is secured," Silas announced, his voice devoid of emotion. "His death will cleanse this land." But before Silas could issue the order, a blinding white light erupted from the center of the valley. It was the combined effort of the three armies, a desperate, agonizing plea for salvation, a perfectly timed, devastating blow. Ixion's physical manifestation, already flickering and unstable, disintegrated into a shower of iridescent ash. The veil of shadow, which had choked the land with perpetual twilight, began to recede, revealing glimpses of a sky once vibrant with stars. The air cleared, carrying with it the scent of something clean, something holy. But the victory was bittersweet. As the last vestiges of Ixion's power vanished, the truth of the traitor's tithe became horrifyingly clear. Not just leaders, but ordinary people, loyal soldiers, devoted families had been sacrificed in this elaborate deception. Their lives used to fuel a cosmic horror. The ground around them pulsed with residual energy, marked with shallow graves, the silent testament to the terrible cost of their triumph. Chapter 6. Echoes in the Dust. The silence after Ixion's fall was heavier than the perpetual twilight that had preceded it. It wasn't a comforting silence, but one pregnant with loss, with the raw, visceral understanding of how close they'd come to oblivion. The Valley of Ashes, once a stage for impending annihilation, was now a scarred testament to that near miss. The air still shimmered faintly with residual energy, a ghostly echo of the cosmic battle fought within. Kalen, still reeling from the nausea and the horrifying realization of Marius' resistance, found himself pulled from his stupor by Gareth, the Orcish Exile. Gareth, a mountain of scarred muscle and simmering fury, wasn't offering comfort. Instead, he extended a calloused hand, gently guiding Kalen towards the makeshift memorial, a circle of carefully stacked stones marking the graves of the fallen, the innocent who'd been caught in the gears of Ixion's deception. "Look at this," Gareth grunted, pointing to a small, intricately carved wooden bird lying amongst the stones. "A child's toy, found near Bishop Vorlag's body. He believed he was defending Arathor. He was a murderer." Kalen knelt, his fingers tracing the smooth curves of the wood. The weight of the loss settled upon him, a crushing burden far heavier than any sword had ever wielded. The concept of cleansing Silas' sterile pronouncements felt hollow, a justification for slaughter. "Silas, he's a monster," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "He believed he was doing the righteous thing. That's what the veiled hand tells everyone, isn't it? Justification layered upon justification until the truth is buried beneath a mountain of blood." Across the valley, Ilara, the Elven Ranger, was examining the stones with a focused intensity. Her silver eyes, usually alight with a serene intelligence, were narrowed with a grim calculation. "The energy signature is unique," she murmured, pulling out a small, intricately crafted device made of polished obsidian and interwoven silver. "It's not pure chaotic energy like Ixion's was. It's layered, as if the sacrifice was intentionally shaped, directed. A carefully constructed ritual designed to amplify the entity's power." As she spoke, Master Silas, flanked by a contingent of Arathor guards, approached. He was a man sculpted by duty, his face etched with an almost unsettling calm. "Progress reports, Ranger," he demanded, his voice clipped and precise. "We must determine how many more infiltrated our ranks. We cannot afford complacency." "We've identified a pattern, Master Silas," Ilara replied, her voice tight. "The targets weren't chosen at random. They were individuals with a strong connection to the source of the kingdom's power, a bishop, a clan chieftain, a high priestess. They were vessels, primed to receive the corruption. Gareth let out a guttural snarl, and the veiled hand ensured they were the most devoted. Like Vorlag, who bled Arathor's holy fire to bolster Ixion's strength. A tense silence descended as Silas considered this. The raw emotion emanating from the trio, the grief, the anger, the chilling realization of their own complicity, was a stark contrast to his carefully cultivated facade of order. "We will continue the investigation," Silas stated, his voice devoid of inflection. "But we must prioritize containment. The threat of chaos remains. The survivors of the mass sacrifice must be accounted for, questioned, neutralized if necessary." Just then, a tremor ran through the valley, a subtle vibration beneath their feet. The residual energy from Ixion's destruction, it seemed, wasn't entirely gone. From the center of the now cleared area, a single perfect white rose began to bloom, its petals shimmering with an ethereal light. It wasn't beautiful in a conventional sense, it radiated an almost unbearable intensity, a concentrated pocket of the lingering chaos. It's feeding, Kalen realized, a primal instinct kicking in. The remnants of Ixion. It's trying to rebuild itself, using the lingering energy of the sacrifice. Ilara immediately moved, drawing her twin blades, Whisper and Shadow, and positioning herself between the rose and the others. "Gareth, secure the perimeter. Master Silas, I need to analyze this energy signature. We can't simply destroy it. We need to understand how it's manifesting." As Gareth moved to obey, Salas' face hardened with a grim determination. "This rose, it's a symptom. A testament to the corruption that still permeates our world. We will not let it flourish. We will eradicate it. And we will ensure that every single trace of the Veiled Hand is purged from Arathor, from the Orcish Horde, and from the Moon-Glow Elves." But as he spoke, a whisper, thin as smoke, brushed against Kalen's mind. It wasn't a voice, but a feeling, a cold, calculating awareness. Patience. It was followed by a chilling promise: the tithe is not complete. Looking out over the ravaged valley, Kalen knew, with a sickening certainty, that their victory was merely a temporary reprieve. The echoes of the past, the ghosts of betrayal and sacrifice, were far from silenced. The true war, he suspected, had only just begun. Chapter 7. The serpents coil. The rain in the Valley of Ashes had shifted from a mournful drizzle to a violent, icy downpour, mirroring the tempest brewing within the assembled forces. The air, thick with the metallic tang of blood and the lingering scent of burnt magic, vibrated with a palpable tension. The Circle of Penance, as Kalen had dubbed it, the hastily formed alliance of humans, orcs, and elves, stood in a ragged semicircle, the remnants of the mass sacrifice, a gruesome tapestry of fallen banners and shattered bodies. The initial shock of the coup had given way to a grim, methodical process. Gareth, the Human Inquisitor, a man built like a weathered oak, was overseeing the collection of the tainted relics, the blessed weapons, the corrupted sigils, the holy firestones that had fueled the sacrificial ritual. His team, a mixture of hardened Arathorian soldiers and newly recruited truth-seekers, were meticulously cataloging each piece, their faces grim with the weight of the desecration. Across the circle, Vorlag, the Orcish Exile, was a figure of unsettling calm amidst the chaos. Had spent weeks amongst the Horde, observing their brutal tactics, learning their ingrained distrust. Now, he was directing the dismantling of the bloody altars, his massive frame radiating a quiet power. The Orcish warriors, initially suspicious of the elven presence, were falling into a disciplined rhythm, meticulously cleansing the stone with alchemic solutions, a stark contrast to the savage frenzy of the earlier battle. Silas, the Elven Ranger, was still meticulously examining the iridescent rose, the source of the lingering energy, his brow furrowed in concentration. Had drawn a circle of protective glyphs around it, a shimmering web of ancient magic, but even he admitted the rose's influence was unnerving. "The energy is unstable," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant hum. "It's not a simple echo of Ixion's power. It's refined, filtered through the agony of the sacrifice. It's learning, adapting." Kalen, however, felt the unsettling whisper again, a subtle probing in his mind. It wasn't direct, but rather a carefully crafted suggestion, a sliver of doubt designed to undermine their resolve. He ignored it, focusing on the unsettling observation made by Gareth the bishops: they weren't just corrupted by the Veiled Hand's influence. They created it. The fire they blessed wasn't purification, it was a conduit, amplifying the shadow magic of the entity. The revelation sent a fresh wave of fury through the human ranks. It solidified the idea that this wasn't simply a case of treason. It was a deliberate manipulation, a systematic twisting of their fate. Suddenly, Vorlag slammed his massive hand down, silencing the immediate discussion. "Silence. I've received reports. The remnants of the Blood Pact, those loyal to the deposed chieftain Grimfang, are attempting to break through the eastern flank." The roar of battle erupted anew. The Arathorian knights, bolstered by Vorlag's disciplined warriors, charged into the fray, their steel meeting the savage claws of the Orcs. Elven archers, nimble and deadly, rained down a storm of arrows, picking off the approaching raiders. Kalen, with Ilara and a small contingent of truth-seekers, moved to reinforce the line, the rain plastering their hair to their faces. As they fought, Kalen noticed a peculiar pattern emerging in the attacks. The Blood-Pact warriors weren't simply driven by blind loyalty, they seemed to be moving with a strange, almost coordinated precision. Then he understood. The whisper in his mind solidified into a chilling certainty. "Silas!" he shouted, dodging a brutal blow from a heavily armored orc. "The rose isn't just an energy source, it's a beacon. The Blood Pact aren't attacking us, they're guiding Ixion's influence." Silas, his eyes glowing with an unsettling light, nodded grimly. The Veiled Hand anticipated this. They knew we would purge the visible corruption. They sought to exploit the vulnerability of our faith, to subtly influence the minds of our warriors, directing them to a more strategically advantageous location. He raised his hand, and a wave of shimmering energy emanated from his fingertips, weaving a complex counterspell around the rose. "We need to sever the connection. Destroy the source." But as Silas began to chant, a dark, serpentine shape began to coil out from the rose's core, shimmering with the same iridescent light. It wasn't a creature of flesh and blood, but a construct of pure shadow, writhing with a malevolent intelligence. The serpent lunged, striking at Silas with impossible speed, forcing him to deflect the blow with a surge of magical energy. Kalen realized with horror that the tithe wasn't just a sacrifice of lives, it was a sacrifice of knowledge, of potential. Ixion wasn't simply rebuilding itself, it was learning how to corrupt, how to manipulate, and the true horror of the situation was becoming terrifyingly clear. The betrayal hadn't just corrupted their leaders, it had poisoned their very souls. And the serpent in the rose was a testament to that corruption. Chapter 8. The serpents embraced the air in the ruined shrine of Vorlag, the forgotten god of judgment, thrummed with a sickening energy. Silas lay slumped against a shattered altar, his face pale, his hands spasmed with residual magical exhaustion. The shimmering rose, once a source of vibrant, healing energy, pulsed with a bruised, almost sickly violet light, and the serpentine shadow, now solidified into a writhing form, circled the artifact, its eyes pools of obsidian, fixed on Kalen and Gorok with unsettling patience. "It's feeding on our doubt," Gorok rumbled, his massive axe, Bloodfang, resting heavily on the stone floor. "The despair, the fear, it thrives on the lies. It's not just a guardian, Kalen, it's an amplifier." Kalen, his elven senses straining, agreed. Silas was right. The veiled hand wasn't merely influencing our kings. They were meticulously crafting a narrative of distrust, amplifying the worst instincts of our races. The rose wasn't directing Ixion. It was a mirror, reflecting back the inherent biases and resentments Wed allowed to fester. He gestured towards the serpent, now meticulously dissecting a fragment of the rose's core with unsettling precision. It's taking what we believe to be true and twisting it into something perfect. Suddenly, a guttural shout echoed through the shrine. Lord Theron, Arathor's Inquisitor, a man forged in the fires of righteous fury, burst through the crumbling doorway, his silver-plated hammer raised. Behind him trailed a contingent of elite guard, their faces grim, their movements precise. "This is madness!" Theron bellowed, his voice ringing with barely suppressed rage. "You've allowed a shadow construct to possess this relic. Silas, your incompetence is an insult to the light." Kalen ignored him, his focus entirely on the serpent. "Theron, observe! The veiled hand didn't just corrupt our leaders, they've infiltrated the very foundations of our faith. That isn't a guardian, that's a puppet, and it's been given a masterpiece of deception." He channeled a pulse of white energy, attempting to disrupt the serpent's movements, but it effortlessly deflected the blast, dissolving the energy into harmless motes. The serpent, unfazed, continued its work, extracting the rose's essence not as nourishment, but as meticulously recorded data. "It's learning!" Gorok roared, charging forward, Bloodfang a whirling storm of steel. The Orcish Exile, a warrior forged in the crucible of exile, attacked with primal fury, driven by a righteous anger that burned hotter than any flame. He managed to momentarily stun the serpent, forcing it to retreat, but it quickly recovered, its movements fluid and unnervingly intelligent. Just as Theron was attempting to rally his guard, Kalen saw an opening. He unleashed a focused blast of pure arcane energy, a concentrated beam of starlight, aimed directly at the serpent's core. The serpent shrieked, a sound that scraped against the very fabric of reality, and momentarily recoiled, revealing a small, pulsating orb within its form. The source! Silas gasped, recovering his senses and scrambling to his feet. "It's not drawing power from the rose, it's recording the rose's power. It's building a map, a template for perfect manipulation." He raised his hands, chanting in the ancient tongue of the first elves, weaving a complex counterspell. But the veiled hand had anticipated this too. As the last spell reached its crescendo, a voice cold, smooth, and utterly devoid of emotion echoed through the shrine. "Such predictable tactics, little ranger. Such admirable, yet ultimately futile, devotion to your fleeting ideals." The voice came from the serpent itself. It spoke in perfect, flawlessly articulated common, a disconcerting familiarity woven into its tones. "Ixion understands your desperation, your need for order. It offers you a solution, a world free from conflict, free from uncertainty. All you have to do is surrender yourselves to its guidance." Theron, momentarily stunned, regained his composure and brought his hammer down with a resounding crash, shattering the altar beneath the serpent's form. A cascade of arcane energy erupted, momentarily engulfing the serpent in blinding light. But the effect was temporary. As the light faded, the serpent reformed, seemingly unscathed, and to their horror several of Theron's guard collapsed, clutching their heads, screaming in agony. "It's weaving illusions," Kalen realized, his face grim. "It's feeding on our fears, projecting our own doubts, our own desires. It's turning us against each other." The realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. The War of the Shattered Sky wasn't just a war for power. It was a carefully orchestrated trap, designed to break them down, to unravel their societies, to prepare the way for Ixion's full arrival. The serpent and the knowledge it gleaned wasn't just about destruction, it was about control. "We need to cleanse this place," Gorok said, his voice tight with grim determination. "Burn it to the ground." Kalen nodded, His eyes narrowed. But we can't just burn it. We need to rewrite the narrative. We need to disrupt its learning process. He looked at Silas, then at Theron, then at Gorak. We need to confront the lie itself. Chapter 9. The Echo of Fear. The stench of burnt resin and shattered stone clung to the air, a sickly sweet reminder of the serpent's initial assault. The Temple of Whispers, once a place of reverence for the forgotten gods of illusion and deception, now resembled a battlefield scarred by desperate, futile attacks. Theron, his face slick with sweat and grime, gripped his warhammer, the familiar weight a small comfort against the rising tide of paranoia. The fallen guards, still writhing with silent screams, were meticulously being tended to by elven healers, their faces etched with a profound sadness. The truth sight is working, but it's distorted, Kalen announced, his voice strained. He was surrounded by a circle of elven mages, their silver hair shimmering faintly as they desperately attempted to filter the chaotic energy radiating from the temple. The illusions aren't merely visual. They're layered, subtly altering our perceptions, amplifying our deepest insecurities. It's a master craftsman, this serpent, shaping nightmares into reality. Silas, the Human Inquisitor, remained a stoic presence, his hand resting on the hilt of his blessed blade, Oathkeeper. Had spent the last hour observing the elven mages, his sharp eyes missing nothing. The whispers started with Theron, doubts about his strength, about his judgment. Then, Kalen's own anxieties about the burden of leadership, and Gorak's simmering resentment towards the elves. It's a symphony of self-doubt meticulously orchestrated to sow discord. Gorak, the Orcish Exile, paced restlessly, his massive frame radiating controlled fury. Had initially been the loudest proponent of destruction, but the agonizing collapse of his guards, the horrifying realization of their suffering, had quieted his rage, replacing it with a grim, unsettling thoughtfulness. The serpent it feeds. It grows stronger with every ounce of fear. We're not fighting a beast, we're fighting a living echo of our own darkness. Kalen interrupted his musings, his gaze fixed on the serpent's shattered altar. Silas is right. It's not just influencing us, it's manipulating the very memories of our people. We've heard tales of our kingdoms turning on each other, of righteous fury twisting into blind hatred. It's planting the seeds of conflict before Ixion can even fully manifest. A sudden, guttural cry ripped through the chamber. One of the remaining elven healers, a young woman named Lyra, collapsed, clutching her head. The visions, the faces of my family. They are accusing me. They say I betrayed the grove, that I consort with shadows. Panic threatened to erupt. The elven mages frantically channeled their magic, attempting to shield Lyra, but the serpent's influence was insidious, permeating even the most potent defenses. Kalen stepped forward, placing a calming hand on Lyra's arm. Focus, Lyra. Breathe. We must break the illusion. We need to confront it, not flee from it. I've been studying the serpent's movements, its energy patterns, Silas announced, his voice gaining confidence. It's not a mindless creature. It's learning. It's analyzing our reactions, refining its techniques. We can't simply attack it with brute force, we need to disrupt its learning process. He gestured towards a series of intricately carved stone pillars that lined the chamber's perimeter. The Temple of Whispers was built upon a nexus of ley lines, conduits for arcane energy. If we can overload these lines, create a chaotic surge, we might overwhelm the serpent's ability to process information, to weave its illusions. A dangerous gambit, Kalen cautioned. A surge of uncontrolled magic could just as easily consume us. It's a calculated risk, Silas replied, his eyes gleaming with determination. We've already been paralyzed by fear. We need to fight fire with fire, not with raw power, but with strategic disruption. Gorak, surprisingly, offered a suggestion. The serpent, it craves knowledge. Perhaps we can feed it something misleading, something false. A carefully constructed lie, delivered with absolute conviction. The idea hung in the air, unsettling and brilliant in its simplicity. They were essentially arguing with a being of pure deception, attempting to influence its understanding through a deliberate fabrication. Kalen nodded slowly. It's a terrifying prospect, but it might be our only hope. Silas, you'll craft the lie. Gorak, you'll deliver it. I'll assist, amplifying the effect with a targeted enchantment. Lyra, you'll remain a conduit, focusing your mind to reinforce the illusion. We start with the most devastating lie, that the war of the shattered sky is a righteous struggle, that we are fighting for the very soul of our worlds. As Silas began to mutter incantations, weaving a complex narrative of righteous fury and divine judgment, a chilling realization dawned on Kalen. The serpent wasn't just feeding on their fears, it was feeding on their hopes. It was offering them a false promise of victory, a seductive lie that resonated with the deepest desires of their hearts, a world free from conflict, a world ruled by unwavering certainty. And as the first tendrils of the illusion began to wrap around their minds, Kalen understood with chilling clarity that the true enemy wasn't just Ixion, but the seductive whisper of surrender. Chapter 10. The Serpents embrace the air in the obsidian chamber of the Shadow Weaver, a relic of a forgotten, utterly twisted elven civilization, thrummed with a low, unsettling resonance. Silas incantations, usually a focused torrent of elemental energy, were now fractured, layered, a deceptive mimicry of true magic. The scent of ozone mingled with something older, something profoundly unsettling, the musk of decay, overlaid with a sickly sweetness, like overripe fruit on a funeral pyre. Lyra, draped in woven shadows and pulsing with a pale, ethereal light, struggled to maintain the enchantment. She felt it, a subtle pulling, a tug at the edges of her mind. The illusion, meticulously crafted by Silas, was gaining purchase, not just on the minds of the assembled council, the fractured representatives of Arathor, the Iron-Horde, and the Moon-Glow Elves, but on Ixion himself. The air shimmered, the obsidian walls seemed to breathe, and the serpent, a coil of pure shadow that dominated the room, pulsed with a disturbingly vibrant energy. "It's stronger," Lyra gasped, her voice strained. "The resonance is escalating. The lie, it's becoming self-aware." Gorak, stoic as ever, adjusted the intricate arrangement of stones around him, the source of his power. He was a master of the old ways, a relic of a time when Orcish magic wasn't dominated by the frantic, blood-fueled fury of the present, but by a careful understanding of the natural order. The Weaver understood the serpent. It seeks not just to deceive, but to shape perception. Silas' words are a powerful catalyst, but they are only a brushstroke on a canvas of primal desire. Silas, a Human Inquisitor famed for his ruthlessness and unwavering dedication to the Order of the Eternal Flame, remained rigid, his face pale beneath the flickering light of the chamber's central brazier. He hadn't spoken in what felt like an eternity, lost in the obsessive recitation of his carefully constructed narrative. The words, a blend of religious fervor and calculated manipulation, painted a picture of a world on the brink of annihilation, a world saved only by their unified defiance against a nameless, encroaching dark. "He's feeding on our hope, isn't he?" Kalen whispered, his hand hovering over the ancient rune carved into his arm, a ward designed to resist mental intrusion. He watched with a growing dread as the council members, initially skeptical, began to visibly shift. The hardened expressions of the elven mages softened, their faces etched with a desperate yearning for peace. The Iron-Horde chieftains, typically brimming with aggressive pride, lowered their heads, a flicker of something akin to fear in their eyes. Even the hardened faces of the Arathor generals seemed to soften, replaced by a grim determination, fueled not by duty, but by the intoxicating promise of victory. "The serpent thrives on certainty," Kalen said, his voice tight with urgency. "It doesn't want to convince us of truth. It wants to give us the illusion of truth, a comfortable lie that justifies their actions, their betrayal." As Silas finished his final incantation, a wave of energy washed over the chamber. The serpent, previously a diffuse, swirling mass, solidified, taking on a more defined form. It resembled a colossal serpent, scales of shadow shimmering with iridescent colors, its eyes burning with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. "It's recognizing itself," Lyra choked out, her body trembling. "It's taking on the shape of the narrative, mirroring our expectations. It's winning." Suddenly, a voice, not spoken but projected directly into their minds, resonated through the chamber. It was a voice of infinite patience, laced with amusement and a chilling detachment. "You seek to understand me? To control me? You are, as always, tragically misguided. You believe you are fighting for your worlds, for your people. But you are merely puppets, dancing to the tune of a desire you cannot comprehend. Your ambition, your hatred, your need for order, these are the very things that allow me to flourish." The serpent uncoiled, its vast form filling the chamber, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls. It raised its head, a horrifying display of immense power, and fixed its gaze upon Kalen. "You, Ranger, are particularly susceptible. Your meticulous planning, your relentless pursuit of justice, it's a beautiful illusion. But illusions, my dear, shatter." Before Kalen could react, a tendril of shadow, swift and cold, lashed out and struck him, not with physical force, but with a concentrated blast of psychic energy. He stumbled back, clutching his head, his vision blurring. The sensation was not pain, but a profound sense of loss, as if a fundamental part of his being, his drive, his purpose, were being irrevocably eroded. "The lie is taking root!" Gorok roared, instinctively launching himself at the serpent, a crude but effective battle-axe raised high. "We must sever the connection." But it was too late. The serpent, anticipating their action, effortlessly deflected the blow with a ripple of shadow. "Foolish gesture," the voice echoed, amused. "You mistake a reflection for the source. You still believe you can fight me through force. You are trapped, little mortals, trapped within the very narrative you crafted." The serpent's eyes burned with a terrifying intelligence. The traitor's tithe will be completed. Chapter 11. The serpent's mirror. The chamber pulsed with a sickening warmth, the air thick with the residue of the psychic assault. Kalen lay on the cold stone floor, his head throbbing, the world swimming in a nauseating haze. Gorok, bruised and bleeding, knelt beside him, applying a poultice of crushed moon petal, a desperate yet effective elven remedy. Across the vast chamber, Lord Valerius, the Human Inquisitor, stood rigid, his face a mask of grim determination. He hadn't moved since the serpent's words, his hand instinctively gripping the holy symbol of Athelred, the sun god. "It didn't just steal my ambition. It showed me why I craved it," Kalen gasped, his voice strained. "The endless pursuit of justice, it's a cage, a self-imposed torment. He wasn't just corrupting me, he was illuminating the terrible logic of my own desires." "Silence, Ranger," Valerius commanded, his voice low and dangerously controlled. This creature is feeding on our doubt, on our righteous anger. We cannot succumb to its whispers." Gorok grunted in agreement. "Words are wind. We must act. Valerius, the elven spell, can it pierce this reflection?" The Elven Ranger Lyrian, his silver hair catching the faint light filtering through a crack in the chamber's obsidian ceiling, nodded, his expression grave. "I can weave a spell of truth sight, but it will be volatile. The serpent's influence is already deeply ingrained within the minds of our leaders. To force a vision, it risks shattering their sanity, and perhaps ours as well." He began to chant, a low, resonant melody that seemed to vibrate through the very stone of the chamber. Runes of shimmering silver materialized around him, weaving intricate patterns in the air, drawing upon the latent magic of the Moon-Glow Elves, magic rooted in perception, in understanding the underlying truths of the world. As Lyrian chanted, the shadows within the chamber seemed to writhe, resisting the intrusion. Suddenly, Valerius staggered, clutching his head. A wave of dizzying images flooded his mind, faces of men head sworn to uphold, twisted in expressions of greed and self-interest, maps of the kingdom riddled with secret passages, each leading to a hoard of stolen artifacts, the glint of blood on his own hands as he interrogated suspected traitors, driven by a fervent, almost manic belief. "It's working!" Lyrian shouted, desperately maintaining the spell. "I'm saying the corruption. The Veil Hand is not merely manipulating events, they are orchestrating them. They are actively feeding the serpent with our own desires for power and control." But the effect wasn't purely enlightening. It was agonizing, a brutal confrontation with the darkest corners of his own soul. Valerius screamed, a guttural roar of despair and self-loathing, collapsing to his knees. "Stop it!" he shrieked, his eyes wide with horror. I can't bear it." Gorok, witnessing Valerius' torment, hesitated. He understood the inherent risk of Lyrian's spell, but he saw the growing desperation in the Inquisitor's eyes. The serpent's influence wasn't just affecting the leaders, it was seeping into the very foundations of the war, poisoning the hearts of their soldiers. "Lyrian, focus!" Gorok bellowed, pushing himself forward. "Target the mages! Reveal their deception." As Lyrian shifted his focus, the shimmering runes intensified, targeting the mages, a handful of high-ranking elven officials who had been subtly bolstering the serpent's power with corrupted rituals. The effect was immediate and devastating. The mages, mid-chant, froze, their faces contorted in expressions of utter terror as they witnessed the horrific truth. Their actions weren't driven by any noble purpose, but by a grotesque parody of ambition, fueled by the serpent's whispers. They were illusions, puppets dancing to a tune they didn't understand. Just as the last of the elven mages succumbed to the spell's revelation, the serpent's voice echoed through the chamber, filled with a chilling triumph. "Impressive! A glimpse of clarity, perhaps, but a momentary distraction. You still cling to your righteous indignation. You still believe you can control the chaos. You are a child playing with a storm." The serpent uncoiled, its vast form filling the chamber, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls. It raised its head, a horrifying display of immense power, and fixed its gaze upon Kalen. "You, Ranger, are particularly susceptible. Your meticulous planning, your relentless pursuit of justice, it's a beautiful illusion. But illusions, my dear, shatter." Chapter 12. The serpent's gaze. The air in the obsidian citadel hung thick with the residue of corrupted magic, a metallic tang overlaid with the cloying sweetness of decay. Lyrian, Kalen, and Gorok stood within the central chamber, the once pristine white stone now stained a sickly gray, reflecting the serpent's unsettling influence. The final vestiges of the elven mages, frozen in grotesque poses of horrified understanding, slumped against the walls, their eyes vacant, their movements jerky and unnatural. The silence was broken only by the drip, drip, drip of an unseen liquid, and the ragged breathing of the three warriors. "It's pervasive," Kalen said, his hand instinctively reaching for the grip of his ancestral longbow. "Shadow found. The corruption isn't just in their rituals. It's woven into the very fabric of this place. Like a stain that refuses to be washed out." Gorok grunted, his massive frame radiating controlled fury. "The blood of the Horde is not easily soiled. These men, these bishops, sought to taint our honor with lies and greed. They will pay." He hefted his great axe, Ironbreaker, the polished steel gleaming even in the diminished light. Let us finish what the truth sight began. Lyrian, usually the most measured of the trio, remained rooted to the spot, his pale blue eyes fixed on the colossal serpent. It wasn't simply a monstrous beast. It was a locus of immense, unsettling power, a swirling vortex of shadow and iridescent scales. Its eyes, pools of liquid mercury, seemed to penetrate Kaelin's very soul, assessing, judging, and Lyrian realized with a chilling certainty amused. "Don't stare, Ranger," Kaelin cautioned, his voice low and urgent. "It's feeding on your focus. It knows you're the key." "It knows everything," Lyrian countered, his voice strained. "The serpent anticipated our investigation, anticipated our doubts. It's not merely responding to our actions, it's orchestrating them." He pointed a trembling finger at one of the fallen mages, a tall, silver-haired man named Theron, whose face was locked in a silent scream. This wasn't a simple act of betrayal. It was a performance, designed to lull us into a false sense of security while it solidified its control. Suddenly, the serpent's voice, a whisper that seemed to resonate directly within their skulls, shattered the silence. "Such astute observations, Ranger. You possess a commendable tenacity. But tenacity without understanding is merely stubbornness. You perceive the corruption, but you fail to grasp the reason behind it." The serpent uncoiled further, its immense form eclipsing the chamber. Shadows writhed and pulsed, mimicking the movement of its scales, and the air grew colder, thick with the scent of ozone, and something ancient, something utterly alien. "You believe this is a war for power," the serpent hissed, its voice laced with a dry, mocking amusement. "You see conflict, ambition, greed. These are merely the tools of a clumsy instrument. The true battle is not for the control of magic, but for the control of perception. Ixion doesn't want power. Ixion wants to be believed." It raised its head, a horrifying display of immense power, and fixed its gaze upon Kaelin. "You, Ranger, are particularly susceptible. Your meticulous planning, your relentless pursuit of justice, it's a beautiful illusion. But illusions, my dear, shatter." As the serpent spoke, the room shifted subtly. The air thrummed with an increased intensity, and the runes Lyrian had activated began to pulse with a frenzied light. He felt a jarring disconnect, a sensation of being pulled apart, as if his own thoughts were becoming fragmented and distorted. Gorak, reacting instinctively, swung Ironbreaker in a wide arc, aiming to cleave the serpent's head from its body. But the axe passed through the creature's scales as if they were smoke, leaving no mark. The serpent didn't even flinch. "Foolish strength," the serpent chuckled, its voice laced with disdain. "You attack the shell, but you ignore the core. You fight against the illusion, not against the source." Kaelin, recognizing the serpent's deliberate manipulation, shifted his attention. He scanned the chamber, searching for anything, a symbol, a pattern, a clue that might offer an explanation. His gaze fell upon a large obsidian mirror, previously unnoticed, set into the wall behind the fallen mages. The mirror wasn't reflecting the chamber, but rather showing a distorted, fragmented image of the Valley of Ashes, the site of the planned final battle. And within that fragmented image, he saw something else, a single, pulsating point of light, radiating an intense, sickly green. "There!" he shouted, pointing towards the mirror. "The source! It's not here, but it's linked to the valley." Before he could complete his thought, the serpent unleashed a wave of pure psychic energy, slamming into him with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled back, clutching his head, his vision blurring, his mind reeling. "You will understand, Ranger," the serpent's voice echoed in his mind, cold and relentless. "But understanding comes at a price." Chapter 13. The serpent's whisper, the psychic assault, slammed into Kaelin like a tidal wave, a torrent of fragmented memories, twisted desires, and the chilling certainty of utter doom. It wasn't simply pain, It was a violation, a probing into the deepest recesses of his mind, dredging up every fear, every doubt, every moment of vulnerability. Images flashed the faces of his fallen comrades, the bleak gray of the Valley of Ashes, the manic gleam in the eyes of Lord Theron, the human commander, promising glory in death. When the assault subsided, leaving him gasping for breath, his head throbbing with a dull, persistent ache, he felt altered. Not physically, but something had shifted within him, a subtle warping of perception. The chamber, once a scene of brutal carnage, now seemed to shimmer with an unsettling energy, as if layers of reality were peeling away. Gorak, ever the pragmatic warrior, was already examining the serpent, now coiled tightly in the center of the ruined chamber. The creature was magnificent, a nightmare rendered in scales the color of polished jade, its eyes burning with an ancient intelligence. Thick, sinuous coils pulsed with a faint, phosphorescent light, and the air around it thrummed with barely contained power. "It speaks truth," Gorak grunted, his scarred face grim. "The lies we've been told. They are built upon this serpent's venom." Across the chamber, Silas, the Human Inquisitor, knelt beside the bodies of the fallen mages, his face a mask of grim determination. He was meticulously examining the remains, not with a focus on identifying the dead, but on discerning the cause of their demise. His fingers traced the intricate runes etched onto the bodies, symbols of corrupted magic, not of battle, but of insidious manipulation. "The bishops they weren't fighting," Silas murmured, his voice low and resonant. "They were receiving. Blessed by this darkness." He indicated the serpent with a curt nod. Theron wasn't promising immortality. He was offering a soul to the shadow. Kalen, still reeling from the psychic intrusion, struggled to piece together the fragments. The mirror, the valley, the serpent, it was a horrifying interconnected web. "The veiled hand," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "It's not simply a conspiracy, it's a deliberate orchestration. A grand, twisted ritual designed to deliver us to what?" Suddenly, a voice, disembodied and resonant, echoed through the chamber. "You are close, Ranger. But you still cling to the illusion of control. Ixion does not want to be summoned. He offers himself. He feeds upon discord, upon desperation, upon the burning desire for a solution to a problem that doesn't exist." The voice seemed to emanate from the obsidian mirror itself. Kalen felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to touch it, to grasp at the reflected image of the valley. But a primal instinct, honed by years of tracking and survival, held him back. As he wrestled with this internal conflict, Silas moved with unsettling speed, retrieving a small, intricately carved stone from one of the mage's pockets. It was a shard of polished quartz, pulsing with a faint internal light. "This," Silas announced, holding it aloft, "is a focusing stone. The mages were using it to amplify the serpent's influence, to channel its power into the minds of our generals. It's been corrupted, of course, imbued with the serpent's essence." He tossed the stone at the serpent, and it struck the creature's head with a resounding thud. The serpent recoiled, a hiss of irritated energy escaping its jaws. But instead of attacking, it simply regarded Silas with a chilling amusement. "Interesting," it hissed. "You seek to disrupt the flow, but you cannot stop the tide. The seeds have been sown. The harvest is imminent." As the serpent spoke, a tremor ran through the chamber, and the fragmented image in the mirror sharpened, becoming almost painfully clear. Kalen now saw with terrifying detail the precise layout of the Valley of Ashes, not as a desolate battlefield, but as a carefully constructed stage. And within the center of that stage he saw them, the assembled armies of Arathor, the Iron-Horde, and the Moon-Glow Elves, poised for a final, devastating confrontation. But superimposed over this reality was another, darker layer hundreds of figures, silhouetted against the crimson glow of the setting sun, preparing for the mass sacrifice. Men and women, warriors and priests, willingly offering themselves to the altar of Ixion, feeding the entity's power, facilitating its return to the physical realm. "They believe they are winning," the serpent whispered, the voice now chillingly close to Kaelin's ear. "They are preparing the ground for our arrival." It paused, a slow, deliberate coil of its body. "And you, Ranger, are the key to their undoing. But the price of knowledge is always steep." Chapter 14. The Crimson Stage. The serpent's words clung to Kaelin like the damp air of the obsidian caves, each syllable a cold, insistent drip, eroding his resolve. The mirror, now radiating a low, pulsating heat, felt less like a window and more like a brand, searing the horrifying truth into his very soul. The War of the Shattered Sky wasn't a clash of legitimate grievances. It was a meticulously orchestrated tableau for Ixion's resurrection. He ripped himself away from the mirror, the image of the Valley of Ashes burning behind his eyelids. The implications were staggering, a monstrous weight crushing the breath from his lungs. The War of the Shattered Sky was a lie, a grand, bloody performance designed to provide Ixion with the fuel he craved. The collective despair and sacrifice of 3 races consumed by delusion. "The seeds have been sown," the serpent's voice echoed in his mind, and he knew he couldn't afford inaction. He turned, driven by a desperate urgency, towards the chamber's entrance, where Silas and Master Alatar, the Elven Mage, awaited him, their faces etched with a similar horror. "I've confirmed it," Kaelin stated, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "The mass sacrifice, it's not some desperate gamble. It's planned. The armies are positioned for it. We're walking into a trap." Silas, a towering figure of Orcish muscle and weathered steel, grunted. "So, the Iron-Horde's chieftains are being led to slaughter, the Arathor's knights to a pyre? By who?" Alatar, his silver hair shimmering faintly in the chamber's light, stepped forward, his movements graceful and precise. "The Veiled Hand. Their influence has been insidious, reaching into the highest councils. The Inquisitor Brambrook, the chieftain Grokter, even Lord Arian, the Elven High Warden, are complicit. They've been promised immortality, a dominion beyond this world, in exchange for the annihilation of their people." The revelation hit Kaelin with the force of a physical blow. Brambrook, a man he had cautiously respected, a champion of justice and the sacred flame, was a traitor. The very foundations of Arathor's faith, the source of their strength, had been poisoned. "We have to warn them," Kaelin said, but the words felt futile, like shouting into a hurricane. "But how?" "They're being manipulated. They see Ixion's influence in the rivalries, in the heightened tensions. They want to believe this war is just." Alatar considered this, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The Veiled Hand thrives on deception. Direct communication will be useless. We need to expose them, to shatter their illusion of control." He glanced at Silas. "The Orcish Exile, Vorlag, possesses a network of spies, cultivated over years in the darkest corners of the Horde. He may be able to disrupt their communications, sow dissent." Silas nodded, his expression grim. "And if Vorlag is compromised, then we become the disruption." Kaelin's hand instinctively went to the silver pendant he wore, a memento of his mentor, a ranger master who had instilled in him a respect for truth and unwavering loyalty. "We reveal the truth, and we fight to protect those who are willing to see it." Just then, a faint tremor shook the chamber. The mirror pulsed violently, and the image of the Valley of Ashes sharpened again, becoming almost painfully clear. Kaelin's blood ran cold. He wasn't just seeing the battlefield, he was seeing the intricate patterns of death unfolding. The choreography of destruction orchestrated by the traitorous leaders. And he saw something more. Within the center of that stage, the assembled armies, Arathor's valiant knights, the Iron-Horde's brutal warriors, the Moon-Glow Elves, stoic archers were arranged in a terrifyingly precise formation. Men and women, warriors and priests, willingly offering themselves to the altar of Ixion, feeding the entity's power, facilitating its return to the physical realm. The mass sacrifice wasn't a desperate act of delusion. It was a carefully timed offering, a potent ritual designed to amplify Ixion's awakening. "They believe they are winning," the serpent hissed, the voice now chillingly close to Kaelin's ear. "They are preparing the ground for our arrival." It paused, a slow, deliberate coil of its body. "And you, Ranger, are the key to their undoing. But the price of knowledge is always steep." Before Kaelin could fully process the serpent's words, a deep, resonant gong echoed through the caves, a signal that had been carefully crafted and transmitted to the designated operatives. Silas tensed, drawing his massive axe. Something's happening. As they prepared for the inevitable, a chilling realization dawned on Kaelin. The serpent hadn't merely revealed a truth, it had orchestrated the unveiling. He wasn't a passive observer. He was a pawn, a carefully placed piece in a game far grander, far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. The fight wasn't just against Ixion, against the corrupted leaders, against the war of the shattered sky. It was against the unseen forces that had manipulated everything, a war for the very soul of their world. Chapter 15, The Obsidian Bloom. The Valley of Ashes was a canvas of gray and crimson, stained by the ceaseless rain and the relentless carnage. The final clash of the War of the Shattered Sky was a brutal ballet of death, a testament to the folly of a war fueled by lies and the insidious tendrils of betrayal. The formation, initially a terrifying tableau of willing sacrifice human warriors ablaze with holy fire, Orcish berserkers locked in a frenzy of ritual combat, and Moon-Glow Elves shrouded in an ethereal, unsettling calm, was fractured. The veiled hand had worked too well. Kaelin, the Elven Ranger, felt a creeping nausea, not just from the chaos, but from the unsettling awareness that pulsed within him. The serpent's words still echoed, a cold vibration in his bones. "They believe they are winning. They are preparing the ground for our arrival." He gripped his longbow tighter, the wood slick with rain, and he realized with growing horror the blood of a fallen human priest. Beside him, Silas, the Orcish Exile, roared a challenge as he cleaved through the ranks of the Iron-Horde warriors. Silas' immense axe, nicknamed Stormbreaker, wasn't merely a weapon, it was an extension of his fury, a conduit for the ancient strength of his people. Had spent years honing his skill, rejecting the poisoned doctrines of the warlord Vorlag, and now he was systematically dismantling the corrupted heart of the Orcish army. "The light, it burns brighter," Silas grunted, his face smeared with mud and the shimmering residue of holy fire. Vorlag was right. This isn't a battle for survival. It's a purge. Suddenly, the resonant gong, a chilling punctuation to the battlefield symphony of screams, intensified. The air shimmered, and Kaelin saw them, the infiltrators. Not in their human, Orcish, or elven forms, but as fragmented shadows, pulsing with the sickly green light of Ixion's influence. The Truth Sight spell, woven by elven mage Lyra, had revealed the rot within, the corruption that had bled into their ranks. Lyra, a staunch defender of the Elven Council, was now fighting alongside Kaelin, her face grim, her hands weaving complex spells to bolster the Circle's defenses. But it wasn't the shadowy figures themselves that caused Kaelin's blood to run cold. It was the focused intent, the chilling efficiency of their actions. They weren't simply bolstering the sacrifice, they were actively guiding it, directing the flow of energy towards the central altar, a colossal obsidian monolith that had risen from the valley floor, pulsing with a malevolent light. "They're feeding him!" Kaelin shouted, loosing an arrow that pierced the shadowy form of a human bishop, plunging it into darkness. They're not seeking victory. They're summoning him. As the final wave of the mass sacrifice reached its apex, a cascade of desperate prayers and offered lives, a palpable shift occurred. The sky darkened, not with rain, but with an unnatural shadow. The obsidian altar pulsed violently, cracking with an unbearable heat. Then, a fissure opened in reality, a swirling vortex of darkness that threatened to swallow the entire valley. Ixion wasn't simply manifesting, he was unfolding, an entity of pure corrupting will. But the sight of the unfolding darkness, of the imminent arrival of something so terrifying, didn't trigger the expected panic. Instead, a collective primal rage erupted from the assembled armies. It wasn't the calculated fury of warriors, but something deeper, something born of betrayal and a desperate burning need for retribution. Silas, bellowing a war cry that shook the ground, charged towards the altar, Stormbreaker raised high. For the Horde! For the blood of the traitors! He slammed the axe into the obsidian, shattering it into 1,000 jagged pieces. Before Silas could react, Kalen, acting on a desperate instinct, notched an arrow not aimed at Ixion, but at the figure leading the altar, Ritual High Bishop Morian, a man who had once preached the sanctity of Arathor, now a hollow-eyed fanatic bathed in the entity's light. The arrow struck true, piercing Morian's throat with a silent thud. The transformation was immediate. The corrupted mages surrounding the altar froze, their shadows shrinking, their forms flickering violently. It was as if the removal of the central point of control severed the flow of power. Then Kalen saw a flash of realization across Salas' face. The exile, the man who'd spent years fighting against the Horde's brutality, understood. "They're not just dying," Silas roared, his voice filled with grim triumph. "They're breaking the cycle. They're refusing to feed the monster." Lyra, weaving a final desperate spell, added, "With each life, we diminish his strength. We are not offering sacrifice, Ranger, we are denying his claim." Just as Ixion's hand, a claw of solidified shadow, reached out to grasp the last vestiges of their world, Kalen, Silas, and Lyra focused all their remaining strength, channeling the collective guilt and fury of their armies into a single devastating pulse of white light. The light wasn't a weapon of destruction, it was a weapon of purification. It flowed from them, through the circle of penance, a blinding torrent that consumed the shadowy figures, shattered the obsidian altar, and finally ripped through Ixion's physical form. The entity didn't explode. It didn't even scream. It simply dissolved, reduced to a wisp of darkness that vanished into the rain.